Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're going to have what I call an education session here. I'm not sure that the reels are worth saving, but it's always worth learning from. I was at a garage sale, tag sale this past weekend. I picked up a lot of Penn reels, and as part of the sale, they made me an offer on a bunch of what they called parts reels, or reels that needed to be repaired. And for the price, it was worth it because I'll probably use the parts, the handles, or whatever anyway. But I have two identical Quantum XRs, XR6 and 7. They're almost identical. Both of them have the same annoyance. They get loud. I'm not sure if the mic is picking that up, but and that's a common occurrence with lower end reels, and these are single ball bearing reels made by Quantum, which is part of Zebco company. And I'm going to take it apart. We're going to call it an education session. I think that there's an answer to the one that can extend the life, and I'll show you that. The other one, this one has got a broken bail on it, and at a future one I'm going to take a look, because when you have two reels that are near identical, you can compare the assemblies and find out what's broken. And a lot of times, even though this one's got a higher capacity, the bodies are pretty much the same. You can swap parts. So I'm going to work on the XR6 today. It's a 60 size reel. It's got that annoying grind to it. It's not not something that I don't encounter a lot. I certainly do on the lower end reels. It's very common in the Shakespeare Alpha series, and I've kind of learned a little bit about it, and hopefully the trick works here. So we're going to start by removing the gear plate. Let's take a look inside, see if we can find out anything. You'll notice I'm wearing a protective glove on my hand, and I also use a parts tray for the smaller pieces and parts, so that I know where to find them when I go to reassemble. And you know, we'll work on it. So Quantum, there's nothing wrong with low-end reels. This is a single ball bearing reel. They all have a purpose out there. The purpose generally is, you know, it's not a daily driver, right? It's an occasional use reel. It's maybe, you know, 5 or 6 times a season. Usually it winds up in the hands of somebody that it's an experience. So perhaps you have a boat or a cottage or something, and you have visitors that come by, and would just like to go fishing for the day, and this is a great reel to hand them. It's a low investment, right? The cost isn't that much. This reel probably cost maybe $29, I'm going to guess, something like that. That seems to be the range for single ball bearing reels. This one's a little bit older, but in the end they're all pretty much the same. So I just took out the 4 case screws, and that just pulls out. Now this is a plastic case, which indicates a little bit about you know, the cost of the reel. It's not graphite, it's not metal, it's a simple molded plastic case. The internal mechanisms are pretty much standard to a spinning reel. We have a main gear. We have the shaft assembly, crosswind assembly and block, and we have single ball bearing, which will be up top here. We're going to take the whole reel apart. In order to do that, we have to remove, in order to get to the main assembly, we have to remove the spool shaft. To do that, you take the nut out of the crosswind block, and again, you can open up 10 different brands of reels, and the majority of them, not 11 out of the, or 9 out of the 10, are going to have something similar to this. And you don't need to remove the spool in order to do that, that part of the procedure. I'm looking at this, there's an awful lot of dirt, and that's sand. So that's probably the #1 worst enemy of a reel is sand. And I would say this one has been on the beach, and it was probably handled by somebody that was inexperienced, probably dropped the reel or the rod and reel into the sand. Maybe they were out wading in the water and got swamped by a wave or something, but that's definitely going to have an effect on the grind. But let's continue with this. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's all, I hope it's visible here, there's all kinds of sand on the collar here. We're going to take this rotor off. We'll see if it got underneath here. Chances are it did. And I really hate geez, everything's falling out now. I hate working on sand because it gets on my bench and it gets in some of my other projects that I work on, and then you've compounded your problems. Again, so we got a molded case. This is kind of how this thing came out here. All fell out, which I guess is good. There's a crosswind gear. There's a crosswind block that sits on that gear. This is where we pulled the shaft from. And you had to pull the shaft because, needs work, but the shaft rides behind this mechanism here, and you cannot pull out the main gear without taking that shaft off. So generally speaking, we want to clean it. It's pretty clean inside. As a matter of fact, it's dry, so it probably hasn't had too much maintenance here. So we'll want to go ahead and rub this down. Now there is a little bit of oil on there, but it's not an oil, it's a grit feel. So my guess is it's ground metal, which is kind of what I was thinking of when I'm hearing the grind. It's kind of hard to see. I guess if I had a magnet it would maybe tell me that, but the low-end gears are never the highest quality metals. I call them pot metal that they're made out of. It's not a brass, it's not a stainless steel, it's not some of the other metals you'll find in the higher cut one, higher quality reels. And the gearing is not the precision die cut of some of the higher level reels that are out there as well. They're probably stamped, or I'm not a manufacturing expert. I couldn't say exactly how these things are made, molded maybe or something. But and that's where I generally find the noise on these things, is because these gears wear, both from they're not as precision quality in terms of engineering as the higher end reels, and I also find that the materials themselves wear down. So just kind of removing the old grease here. And the old grease sort of tells me that it hasn't been used much. It's still got its color. It doesn't have a lot of contamination in it. But I would just probably say that the reel has never been serviced. It looks like it got dunked in the sand. Quality materials and some of the other things have probably just led to what I call excessive slop in the reel, and that generally is what causes the noise. So we've just cleaned those parts. I'm going to put them aside now. We'll come back and lubricate them before we go ahead and finish this reel. But I want to get up top because I saw the sand. I want to take the rotor off, and I also want to lubricate the main bearing. So in order to take the rotor off, you have to remove a set screw on the shaft nut. Then we want to grab the nut. And we'll pull this nut off. In the case of Quantum, as I mentioned, it's part of the Zebco line. I believe the low-end line is what every other low-end line seems to be out there, and it's just base materials. So the good news is that the sand only got in there marginally. Doesn't look like it's corrupted the main bearing. This is the main bearing assembly here. I'm going to wipe the grease off of this. It's not nothing fancy here. The anti-reverse runs underneath here. This is your anti-reverse dog, and we'll show you a little bit about how that works with the main gear component in there. So you can tell the switch here will hold it up if you want it off, and then it releases and this comes down. Again, there's some varnished grease on that underneath there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this main bearing just because of the sand issue. To do that, we remove the 3 screws. And again, this is fairly common procedure, regardless of what kind of reel you're working on. In this case, they use the larger head of the screw to hold the bearing in place. You can just see it touching the collar there. Some others will use a little clip over the top of that. They all serve kind of the same purpose. And then we should just be able to pull this out without much stress. I don't have the strength of my hands to do that. There we go, we got that out, and we can see how that bearing assembly and collar works. So we'll just go ahead and clean it up because there's some junk on here. I use a Q-tip to clean most of this stuff when I just find piles of excess grease. And that'll get that out of the channels there. And again, there's something that's causing an excessive wobble here. I'm not sure what it is, but whatever it is, we're going to try and take care of it as best we could. Now, most of the time, I call these low-end reels disposable. Probably nobody's out there that's going to pay, you know, $15 or $20 to have a reel tuned up and repaired on a reel that only costs approximately that amount. So it's a matter of judgment. When somebody gives it to you, you know, it's no cost there. And like I said, this is kind of a cost for just an education right now. So you saw that I used WD-40 on the bearing. I want to make sure that all the bearings are working well. I'll dry that off, and we're going to go put some reel oil for the bearings in there. But the bearing's turning, that's great. And there's a little, this is a seating piece that works with the anti-reverse. So I showed you that lever before. That lever actually moves a piece in here, which grabs the teeth of these to stop it from reversing. So we're going to go reset this then. Going to go put that back in. Go hit this with some reel oil. I use a Real X oil on these bearings. Probably the best drink of oil it's had all its life. And we'll go put that back on top of the carrier here. We'll get it reseated in there. Just had a little bit of trouble getting that done that way. Okay, there you go. So that's back in. We're going to go put those 3 screws on. Now, most of the time I put those little screws right into my parts bucket. I knew I was just going to pull and replace right away, so I didn't bother to put them in. But it is a good practice to keep all those small parts in a parts tray. And if you'll notice, that parts tray I'm using is just the bottom of a milk jug. It's nothing fancy, but it holds the pieces and parts. And I can't tell you the countless times I've learned from experience that it's better to be safe and take the extra moment and do it that way than be on your hands and knees or cursing your misfortune by looking around your workbench for a spring or something that maybe you had but couldn't find when it came time to reassemble. Okay, so now we've cleaned off that pinion gear. We want to make sure that that gets re-lubed. So I'm going to use some blue grease to do that. I use a Penn Precision Reel Grease. There's plenty of manufacturers out there that make the greases. They all work well, but just make sure that you're using a grease designed for reels when you go do that. So this was this had what appeared to be oil on it, but when I kind of felt around on it, it had more of a metallic grit to it, which says that there's something wearing down, which is my experience with these, and that's what generally causes the noise. Because the noise is just a function of something not aligned properly or being just kind of grinding away, right? And I don't know if sand got in there to cause that, or if it was more along the lines of just the general wear and tear on it, but I can feel it on this block as well. I can feel that grit. So just a little bit more of a wipe down here. I use paper towels and cotton swabs for most of the work that I do. That seems to be a good way to keep these things clean and an efficient and economical way as well. So the blue grease on the back of the crosswind block. Crosswind block goes on the stud. And now here's the difference maker. I find that because these things tend to wear down, and I'm just checking the teeth right now, and I do notice that some of these teeth are flattened a little bit. Because they wear down a little bit, if you have a shim, if you have another one of these washers that is the diameter of the the main gear shaft, if you can put a shim in there, you can tighten it back up. Now, it's not the full purpose fix, but we have one shim here. If you have another one, and I have a parts bucket, and I do have some, because I guessed that that's what was going to happen, I'm going to grab one of these and I'm going to put that over the shaft in addition to that. And this shim is a little bit thicker to that. And then I'm going to reinsert. Now, this is an interesting piece because of the way that anti-reverse works. On the main gear, there's a little V-clip here. So you actually have to align that with one of these holes so you can see through. And then as you go to reinsert this, you want to line up that through the eye socket, if you will, to make sure that that little plastic clip engages with the anti-reverse dog in the back there. So I've got the dog coming down and the clip sitting over it like this at the moment. Once I do that, I can reattach the rotor. And again, we cleaned the sand out of there. So we're going to say that the sand is a partial contributor to the noise. It may have been what caused the grinding completely. We're not expecting to eliminate the noise here because the damage is done. What we have done is we've taken that shim, and that shim should help those worn teeth to engage a little bit better, and should take some of the noise out and also make the reel productive for a short, maybe another season longer. But again, if the purpose of this reel was to be a standby for somebody who came to the boat or the cabin or whatever and just wanted to fish for the day or the week, then you might get another year or two out of this before you got to go spend your next $30 on the replacement of a reel like this. So let's find out how we do with that. So once we do that, we're going to take the spool, put the shaft assembly back in, we rethread it back into the crosswind block, align that hole. I use a little pin to do the alignment, and we can put the screw back in. So this is a good time to tell you, I've worked on these reels, I know enough about them and how the basic assembly is, but if you don't know, or if you're working on a reel that's unfamiliar with you, stop and take pictures along the way. They're good reference points, and it'll help you if you get out of sorts or get out of sequence in terms of the actual assembly. You can go back and look and find out where that part came from. So the other problem that we have with these, because they're not even brass bushings, they're plastic bushings, is sometimes the wear occurs on the back of the bushing, or the plastic bushing. It just wears down. So putting that shim in there oftentimes just helps compensate enough. There's two grooves on this. If you happen to take these out, you won't get the case cover back in unless you make sure that that bushing aligns with those two indentations in the case. I'm going to take a little bit more blue grease. I'm going to put that on the shaft there, and then we're going to close this reel up. I'm going to go back to grab those 4 side post screws. So if we're successful, it won't crank as loudly. I still expect to find a little bit of a grind, but I should have taken a lot of the slop out of this. And if we did, again, it'll serve the purpose of being able to go back out on the beach and continue fishing for a while. So maybe that's a good thing. If that sand was an indication of the type of person who's coming down to the beach to do some fishing, then maybe you don't need anything more than what you got right here, because if it gets sanded again, maybe next time they won't be as fortunate as to find somebody that can clean it out and maybe they help them avoid the damage that sand is going to cause. So we'll see. And if not, it didn't cost me anything. Like I said, it was included as part of the sale of a bunch of reels that I bought. And I like to just call those the price of tuition. You get to learn a little bit more about it. So let's go put that handle back in now. Use that handle nut on the other side. And we'll see what we have. And if we have anything that's okay, we'll go up top there and I'll show you how to do the drags on these. Alright, let's see what we got. We still got a noise in there, so my guess is that even though we tried a little bit with that, that sand has done its damage. A little bit smoother, a little bit smoother. All right, well, I'm just going to go up top, then I'll show you quickly on the drags on how that works. And well, I know the reel can go fishing. It's not going to be top of the line type of fishing, but you know, if a kid's got it, he's not going to worry too much about what the noise is in there. All right, so to do the drags, you want to pull out the spring that holds the drags. There's a groove that this spring rides in on the top of the spool. That'll give you access to the drags. And I'm having a little bit of trouble with that bottom one. Okay, the drags are okay. They're Teflon drags. They don't require any kind of lubrication. You can put a drop of oil or two in there. Again, I'm feeling that sand in here, so I'm just going to go and kind of wipe that down a little bit. Get the drag stack back on. And we'll see. I think overall, yeah, this is smoother than it was. I think some of that noise may have been that the reel was getting caught up there. So it's smoother than it was. I always like to check to make sure that the anti-reverse works as well, which it does, because it wouldn't work if we didn't have that little V-spring in there correct. So, all right, so low-end reels. So what have we learned? We learned that they'll always serve a purpose, that they should be maintained just like any other reel. Should be oiled and checked occasionally, cleaned. That they'll always do what you buy them to do, which is generally occasional use, not daily driving kind of fishing. And overall, the reel will last you, especially if you're only doing, a couple of weeks a year. It'll last you a couple of years before you have to go replace it. We also learned that the cost to repair these probably makes it just a disposable reel, in the sense that it's probably going to cost you as much to repair the reel as it is to replace the reel. All right, so we still got the noise. We can say for sure that it's a solid reel. It's an annoyance, but it took a little bit of the noise, I think, out. If I go against, yeah, so it took a little bit of the grind out. I don't know if it's apparent, but if I feel this, there's much more component to that now than this one. And I think the noise is probably, again, there's one. The teeth are flattened on the main gear. They haven't ripped, but they're flattened, and that's going to cause that. So, all right, well, lesson learned for all of us. It's a neat little trick. Use that little spacer gear. You can prolong the life of something like this, and make sure you clean the reels regardless of whether it's a high-end or a low-end reel. Why embarrass yourself out on the beach handing somebody a reel and have a break on them. So with that, if you like the reel, if you like the video, please indicate that on the screen. If you'd like to see more of these, I'm always taking reels apart, putting them back together, and sometimes just learning from experience what makes a reel good or bad. And I'm trying to pass my experiences along to you. So with that, I'll thank you for watching the video. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.